it is an effective way, I think, to engage the public, to fundraise as well, and to successfully campaign.
Purposely Podcast, amplifying the stories of people who are making a positive difference to society and the environment. People inspired by purpose. Here's your host, Mark Longbottom.
A really warm welcome to Purposely with Rupert Abbott, CEO of GiveOut. It's a community foundation, not place-based, but across the globe, that pools the donation of individuals and organizations and groups of people to support the human rights of people whose rights have been denied because of their sexuality. Rupert is a strong proponent of the human rights movement, and we talk about his own journey as a gay man, as well as his career that has taken him across the globe with a particular focus on Cambodia. Enjoy.
This episode of Purposely was brought to you by Benevity, the all-in-one software solution that benefits employees, customers, non-profits, and society.
Let's get back to the show. Rupert Abbott, really warm welcome to Purposely Podcast.
Hello, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, really good to connect. You are the Executive Director of GiveOut. What's its mission? What's its purpose?
That's right. GiveOut's mission is to grow giving for LGBTQI human rights around the world. You know, in many countries, LGBTQI people face really terrible human rights abuses for being themselves. And, you know, you can look at the current situation in Uganda, that's in the news at the moment, where a law's just been passed that brings in very steep jail terms and even the death penalty for same-sex relations. But, you know, there are some incredible organizations in almost every country, actually, who are working to defend LGBTQI people, tackle inequalities, campaign for long-lasting change. But these organizations are really badly under-resourced. They receive a tiny, tiny fraction of international development aid, just 4 cents in every $100 provided by governments. And meanwhile, the religious right is pumping resources into organizations, movements that are working against equality, against human rights. And GiveOut's role is to bring more resources into the LGBTQI movement. So we work with individuals, with allies, including corporates, to make it easy for them to support LGBTQI rights activism all around the world. So the way it works is that individuals, businesses give to us in one place. We pool those donations and then we provide grants to some incredible LGBTQI organizations. And I'm looking forward to telling you more about their work and the incredible impact that they're having.
And in terms of, so yeah, not quite a traditional donor advice fund. You say pooling resources, pooling donations, but then borrowing that sort of community foundation model, but instead of place-based giving, it's cause focused. Just give us a bit more feel about how it operates and you know, in terms of the giving part.
Yeah, that's right, Monk. I think to describe us as a community foundation, that's the language we use. And that's because we're very much working with our community here in the UK and in other countries, with our allies, you know, with businesses based here in the UK and Europe who want to support the community around the world. And as you say, often a community foundation is place-based. It's individuals, it's companies in a particular location wanting to support good causes, wanting to support the community in that location. For us, it's about the LGBTQI community and allies supporting the LGBTQI community around the world. And that's because, you know, I mentioned that international development aid funding for LGBTQI groups is very, very limited. Trusts and foundations who play a really important role, you know, can change strategies. Governments change political colours. And we want to make sure that we're always here, that our community is always here to support the LGBTQI community around the world. We're there no matter what, we've got each other's back. So the way it works is that individuals and businesses can give to us, and we do the research, the due diligence to understand which groups are doing what, make sure that money is being used legitimately, effectively, and then we provide grants to those groups around the world.
Wonderful. And so established in 2018 by your chairman and founder, Elliot Vaughn. Tell us about his inspiration and then the origins of the charity.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast interview is timely because, as you say, we launched in 2018 and we're celebrating our 5th anniversary. In fact, we've got a party in London tomorrow with some of our supporters and with some of our grant partners around the world are going to be joining that. GiveOut was the brainchild of Elliot Vaughn. Elliot's a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group, management consulting firm. And he has a wonderful husband, Colin. Is gay. He enjoyed success in his career, and he was looking for more purpose and wanting to do more to support his community, our community, the LGBTQI community around the world. But he didn't know how. He wanted to provide funding, to donate, and he realized there wasn't a straightforward way of doing so. And you might find out about an organization, let's say, working in the Caribbean or working in sub-Saharan Africa. You might not know if they're legitimate. Even if you're confident they're legitimate, it might not be easy to get funds to them. Certainly, you can't do it tax efficiently. So, in order to provide support to LGBTQ organizations and to enable others in our community and allies to do so, Elliot came up with the idea of GiveOut, and he worked with 3 others at the Boston Consulting Group, Mike Stamp, Chris Darby, Joseph Falone, to develop the concept and the strategy for GiveOut. And that's how we started. And then that's where I came in. They were looking for an inaugural executive director to turn their vision into reality, I guess, and to develop the strategy into kind of more tangible plans. So I joined right at the end of 2017. We secured registration as a charity right at the end of that year, and then we launched in London in March 2018. And I've been really proud to partner with Elliot, who's the chair of our board, in building GiveOut and achieving what we've achieved in the last 5 years.
Yeah, done a phenomenal amount. I think 37 organizations funded or supported across the globe. You've won awards. You won the Third Sector Breakout Award, which is amazing. And just when you touched on being able to give to, activism or that real grassroots kind of support is really difficult. And to do that safely for donors is also tricky. So, in terms of getting out there and doing the due diligence and understanding the causes that you're going to support, what was the sort of approach that, the team took, that Elliot took in those early days, to go and check out projects and assess them and make sure they're safe?
I think there were, a few key steps. The whole process around deciding where the money goes has evolved over the last few years. I think the first step was broad consultation with those who are active in the LGBTQI movement, including with international organizations based here in the UK, also based in the US. Between us, we had strong connections. My background's in human rights, and I'd worked in LGBTQI rights. So we had strong connections and we had good knowledge of the movement. So to start with, it was really kind of consultation and research to understand, who's who. Then when it came to identifying specific groups to support, we've always gone through a rigorous due diligence process. We actually made sure that we were not the first funder in any case, and we were able to receive references from other donors, including donor organizations supporting a group that we were looking to fund. We would also always receive references. We would always look at the group's governance documents, annual accounts, and do a risk assessment to make sure the very real risks that are present for groups doing this work, that there were mitigation strategies in place. So there was, it was quite an in-depth process. And then over the last couple of years, we developed a grant-making advisory panel working with activists from across the movement who help us to identify gaps actually in the support in the groups we're supporting around the world, where there are issues that they feel we could do more on, and introduce groups to us and recommend groups for GiveOut to be funding, with the donations provided by our community here. So those were some of the key steps. And then I guess the final thing to say is, we have a really strong board, and, governance is absolutely crucial, important for us as it is our donors. And our board has the last say on where any of the funds go.
Yeah. And crucial to all of that is funds in, right? So generous people connecting with your mission and wanting to give and be generous. How's that gone? How's the fundraising element gone?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the work I just described was sort of a fairly kind of a long way of setting out how we've needed to build a new institution. That's been kind of one of three key areas of our work. It's building a new organization. It's the fundraising side, which I'll talk about now. And then, of course, it's the grant making. And I'll speak to that afterwards. In terms of the fundraising, we describe it as growing giving because we're looking to develop LGBTQI giving and philanthropy. And that might be through us, it might not be, it might be in other ways. But we see it as our work in this area is beyond fundraising. But look, we've worked with some really, key individuals in our community, role models really, who have publicly in the early days given to GiveOut through GiveOut. That was really important, I think, in our profile, in our legitimacy, our reputation. People like Antonia Belcher, a trans businesswoman, Suki Sandhu, who's a businessman here, gay businessman of South Asian descent. People like Josh Graff, John Steinberg, Rachel Reese, Emma Cusden, Global Butterflies, some leaders and role models in our community who, publicly supported the movement through GiveOut. And we've also developed some really important, exciting corporate partnerships from banks to law firms to, I guess, better known brands, whether it's Gay Times, whether it's Levi's, all who are looking to support LGBTQI communities around the world, to invest in the LGBTQI movement. It's taken a lot of work, but we're really proud of how our community stepped up. And I think at the heart of it is that sense of solidarity and I think empathy as well. Most of those giving to GiveOut, are LGBTQI, have perhaps some sense of what it might be like to be gay or to be trans in certain countries around the world. And I think that empathy and then that sense of solidarity really is the foundation of their giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked before this podcast actually about, if you talked about the pink pound in terms of donations or support or giving being focused a lot around HIV. And I'm thinking around the sort of 80s and the 90s, and I myself worked in that sector. But actually now with human rights being, always been affected, but in some countries going backwards for a lot of those people, that solidarity, that willingness, that want to support people who have been subjugated because of their sexuality, is more and more sort of needed, it feels like, but maybe it's always been there. But that's the crux of what you guys do. Are there others doing something similar globally? When you looked around and surveyed competitors, probably the wrong word, but are there others that are doing this globally?
Well, I think the first point to respond to is you're absolutely right. I think it is needed now more than ever. We quite deliberately from the beginning have not funded healthcare, provision of healthcare, health services. That's not to say that that's not important work to be funded. But as you say, there has been, funding going into that work. And what we've set out to do is fund activism, work that's changing attitudes, changing policies, practices, laws, LGBTQI human rights activism. And it is needed now more than ever. I sort of set out earlier how the LGBTQI movement receives such a tiny amount of international development funding. There are those working quite deliberately against the LGBTQI movement, looking to undermine respect for our rights and equality. So the need is there, and now more than ever. In terms of what others are doing in this space, GiveOut was established because we recognized there was a gap, that there wasn't an easy way for individuals and businesses who wanted to provide support to do so. There are some incredible international LGBTQ organizations who are campaigning, who are undertaking strategic litigation. But in terms of groups channeling funds to grassroots organizations, there wasn't much going on. There was some of this in the US, groups like Australia and Outright, who we partner with, are increasingly looking to kind of channel resources to groups around the world. But there was nothing in the UK and indeed in many kind of jurisdictions around the world and in Europe nearby.
Rupert, in terms of the projects that you support, tell us about some of the ones that stand out to you or, that you're kind of most proud of or the organization feel like it's had the most impact so far.
Yeah, and and this is, of course, the third and most important area of our work. I described this work we've been doing to build an institution and then the fundraising or the growing giving work we do. But this grant making, the third core area of our work is obviously the most important. And, in 5 years, we've channeled almost £2 million, £1.75 million of new funding to LGBTQI groups around the world. And they've been working across 5 key areas and having real impact across 5 key areas. So there are those groups using the law and the courts to advance equality. And, I'll mention one of our partners in India, CLPR, who actually represented the trans community in the proceedings that ultimately led to the decriminalization of same-sex relations in India, but also provide day-to-day legal representation to trans people to improve their lives. We're also channeling funds to support the creation of safe spaces for our community, in countries like Iraq, Armenia. One of the initiatives that our community funded through us was the rebuilding of Rainbow House, which is a safe space in Jamaica, a really difficult context for the LGBTQI community. Work to provide evidence, undertaking the research for change, also to promote public understanding and acceptance of LGBTQI people. One of our partners in the Czech Republic has just had, or is on the cusp of, a great success in, we hope, ending the requirement for forced sterilisation of trans people before they are able to change their legal gender. And then, as well as that long-term work, we recognise the need for emergency support, crisis support. So around with the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, with the war in Ukraine, with the volcano in Tonga, we know that LGBTQI people are particularly vulnerable in crises. And, in the case of Afghanistan, of course, the LGBTQI people were being targeted. And, one story that stands out for me is that we launched an emergency appeal. It had great support from our community here, including from, well-known faces like Ian McKellen, Russell Tovey, the Pet Shop Boys, to fundraise to support Rainbow Railroad in evacuating LGBTQI people from Afghanistan. And there was one person I won't use their real name, but Amina, who is, a lesbian woman and had grown up in Afghanistan and had actually found community and had friends and was part of a informal LGBTQI group. She risked being, hunted down, arrested and worse by the Taliban. And she was one individual that Rainbow Railroad managed to evacuate, and she's now safe living her life in the UK. So, some of the work that we channel resources to, it's long term and it's life changing. Some of the work, this emergency response work, is life saving. And were it not for the funds that our donors and others were providing, it wouldn't be taking place. And those LGBTQI people would not have been evacuated from Afghanistan. That's just to give you
life-threatening stuff and incredibly serious for a lot of those people in those countries. When we're talking at risk of murder or being beaten up, probably with a bit mild thing like sterilization, being ostracized, being rejected from communities, all of those things must be incredibly motivating for you and the trustees and your supporters. But also you're dealing with a lot of serious topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think I mentioned earlier, it's that sense of connection and empathy and solidarity that I think continues to drive donations and is the great sort of motivating factor for everyone involved and everyone giving, because we want to provide that support to our community.
Crucial for people with their giving, I think, is their feeling that they're going to be able to make a positive difference, that there's some light at the end of the tunnel when the world feels like it's going backwards, and to a certain extent when gay rights are going backwards in some countries or people's lives are at risk. But you touched on this before the podcast. You see wins happening in different countries, and that's the bit that drives you and the team on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we know that our supporters want to hear the good news as well as the bad, and we're able to, report back to them on the impact of their donations. At the same time, I think we play that role educating donors, because change can take time. And sometimes there are short-term wins, or as a result of very long-term struggle, we see laws change, we see same-sex relations decriminalized, but that doesn't take months or even a few years. It can take decades. But, year after year, more and more countries decriminalize. in much of the world, there is changing attitudes for the better. There's stronger LGBTQI movements. Of course, we see setbacks, and we spoke about Uganda and East Africa earlier. But, there is a lot to celebrate. And at GiveOut, we're proud of, our small role in all of that and, the impact that with our community and with allies we've been able to have in a few short years.
And I guess focus is an important thing for you and the trustees in terms of keeping focused and ensuring that, you invest the money well, that, you don't get sidetracked. I guess it comes back to your mission and purpose and the way you're structured and all that you said, organizational building, which is crucial for you guys' future success.
Absolutely. The idea is one day a founder won't be the chair of the board and one day I won't be the executive director, and that we're building an institution to last. New leaders will take on, and this will be a mechanism, a community foundation that plays this role, channeling resources to the LGBTQI movement for decades and decades to come.
And in terms of your leadership, you seem ideally placed to lead the organization. So we're going to dive into your career story, and human rights plays a really significant part of that. But it's personal for you as well, isn't it? Because you're a gay man and this organization is personal for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I wanted to take this role, building and leading GiveOut. I'm gay. I'm married to my wonderful husband, Nara. We live here in Brighton in the UK. Things weren't always easy for either of us, but, we're luckier than most. And we understand how difficult life for LGBTQI people can be in many countries. And I'd worked in human rights for the last kind of over 15 years. And I'd always worked in some way in supporting LGBTQI rights, but it had never been my focus. And I felt that it was actually about time that as a gay man, as part of the LGBTQI community, that I spent more time supporting my community and the rights of LGBTQI people around the world. So, that's why the timing of this role at GiveOut was, right for me.
And go back in terms of your sexuality and your humanity, did you feel like it was challenged growing up? Did you experience abuse? Or did you experience some of the things that people that you help experience? Is there sort of lived experiences of a difficult coming out story for you, or was it very supported in your sexuality and your choices?
Well, honestly, in many ways, I was lucky, and I can't sort of say that I had lived experience of lots of the abuses, the treatment that some of those we're working with and proud to support at GiveOut, go through. But, it wasn't always easy. I grew up in a loving and supportive home in many ways, but actually not a place where being gay was accepted, and for religious reasons, actually. So, in the home, it was clear that being gay was not normal or acceptable, and indeed was wrong. At the time, growing up in the 90s, so, I'm 41 now, so growing up in the 90s, attitudes were quite different to how they are now, So in society, there still wasn't that level of acceptance. And, at school in the UK, we had Section 28, which meant that, teachers couldn't speak about being LGBTQI. So there weren't those role models. So, I grew up feeling different, feeling shame, and feeling kind of an outsider, I think. If I look back, I kind of knew that I was different from my early teens, but I only really honestly kind of accepted who I was while I was at university. It was only after university that I came out. And at that point, the response from my family and friends was really positive. But as I say, there had been kind of years of feeling excluded and sort of being told that who I was wrong, and hiding that and feeling rejection from those you love the most, whether family or others. But, as I say, there's sort of happy ending. And I've been with my husband for 10 years, met him in Cambodia. He's Cambodian. We've been married for 5. In fact, he just got his indefinite leave to remain in the UK, immigration status. That's really positive. So we can kind of
wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and I think, coming back to the work I'm doing now, my human rights career, I think that growing up gay and some of what I experienced, I think it's, it has been the driving force behind my work. If I look back, I wouldn't have known it at the time, but I do take injustice personally. I can't bear to see others treated unfairly. I want what's right, and I care, and I want to make a difference. And because I, in a small way, have experienced, what others in my community have experienced. I felt that shame, I felt that rejection. I think that creates empathy, with others in the community, and indeed others who are marginalised, LGBTQI or not. And I'm sure that's something that, in fact, I know for speaking to them, that's something many of GiveOut supporters feel as well. There's that shared experience, therefore there's that empathy with those we support. And then I think, honestly, it probably created kind of drive. I felt different, I felt excluded, and I wanted to succeed. And I guess there was something going on there as well, which has, probably contributed to, actually having, quite a sort of successful, whether it was at school, university, and in my career. So yeah, in many ways it's sort of shaped me, but, positively, I hope.
Yeah. And, sadly, the suicide rate amongst young gay men or LGBTQI community is significant. And you talked a bit about being on or feeling lonely and feeling like you're on the margins and realizing that you were different. Looking back to when that period of time, maybe it was around university, the importance of mentors, or even if that's not mentors that you can speak to, but do you remember the significance of people that you could identify with when you knew you had these feelings and you knew that you couldn't share it with family members or other people? Do you think back and go, there was some significant stuff that kind of made me keep on keeping on?
Yeah, look, I think there were a couple of things. I think, first of all, I realized myself, I couldn't it wasn't sustainable to kind of live with that burden of not being kind of true to myself, not being open about who I was. I felt very emotional. I think I felt that my mental health was suffering, and I knew that I had to be open about who I was. It just felt to survive that I needed to do that. And I think attitudes were changing, and were in society, but also actually in my family, and therefore it was sort of, while it feels a bit late to have kind of come out just after university, on the other hand, I think if I'd done it a few years before, it perhaps wouldn't have gone quite as well, and I wouldn't have had the same support that I felt then. In terms of role models, it's a really, really good question. And there is someone who I met through university who's, 15 years older than me, let's say. And, he's a successful in his work, gay man, happy gay man, married. And he was a role model, a mentor, and someone I looked up to. And, you need that, right? You need to see that you can, that you can be happy, live a happy, fulfilled life. And of course, as I mentioned, that was something that was denied to, people growing up in the 90s. Gay teachers weren't able to be open because that was illegal, right? To be LGBTQI propaganda, right? was not allowed at school.
Yeah. And being able to see that pathway, right? And being able to connect with people that you feel like you've got a similar lived experience, and so crucial. You talked a bit about your determination. So you went to Oxford Uni, which is phenomenal. Just to get into that universities, or, Oxbridge is challenging. So you did a BA in modern history, from what I could see. You then went on and added law to the picture. Like, just tell us about that, Rupert being super determined and driven, and then arts to law, and how that sort of came about.
Yeah, I studied modern history at university because I loved it, and I got that. I think I loved it at school. I got that from my grandma on my mum's side, and I studied the World Wars, the Northern Ireland Troubles, and it was a real privilege to be taught by some of the best minds in their field, and so that's why I studied history. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do career-wise, and there was an opportunity for those studying at Oxford. The reality was then that, there were opportunities to join, whether it was major law firms, banks, management consulting firms, they were there actively recruiting. And I thought law could be interesting, and could see the kind of power of law in society. And so I signed up to join a global law firm, Baker & McKenzie, and they kind of covered all my kind of legal training, and that's what I'd kind of signed up to do. And it's probably worth mentioning that before university, I had a year out and I went, as kind of others did at that time, backpacking in Southeast Asia with a couple of friends. And I really fell in love with the region and was really fascinated in the history, including the recent history. And one of the countries I didn't visit then was Cambodia and had wanted to visit. So after the first year of university, I went with a couple of friends to visit Cambodia. And I really, really then felt such a strong connection, such an interest, but also sadness about the country's recent history with the Khmer Rouge and civil war that followed. And, really felt that, as I say, that strong connection and a care for the people there. And I can't really explain it, but it was a kind of life-changing visit. So anyway, after university, during law school, I became more interested in and read up more on human rights law, human rights movements, international movement, and, realized that this could be a really fulfilling way to make a bit of a difference. And I realized that while I'd signed up to train at a corporate law firm, it probably wasn't going to be for me. So anyway,
was it the experience of that, like you're, within a few days of doing that, thinking this really isn't for me. What was the specifics of that? Like, was it horrendous for you?
No, that's far too strong. And look, I thought the culture, I was at Baker McKenzie in their London office, and I had the chance to work in Hong Kong for a short time as well. And I thought the culture of the firm was in many ways positive at the time. And they did encourage trainees up to partners to do pro bono work. And I had the opportunity to work on some really interesting and fulfilling human rights projects there, including for those representing detainees at Guantanamo Bay. Also a project we did with the charity Prisoners Abroad, looking at kind of the legal relevant laws, legal frameworks for prisons around the world. And actually, there was a lawyer there, Tom Castles, who oversaw some of that. And he was inspirational as well in the work he was doing, while also having kind of a successful career in terms of kind of the corporate side. But I knew that it wasn't for me because, in the end, of course, the focus was on working with clients, businesses, making money. And that wasn't what motivated me, and also didn't find it very, very interesting. So after qualifying, I had the opportunity. So I should just mention, before joining Baker McKenzie, I having felt that strong connection to Cambodia, having studied law and became really interested in human rights, I organised a kind of a volunteer role internship at the Cambodian Centre for Human Rights in Phnom Penh before I joined Baker McKenzie. And that was sort of also a life-changing moment. I knew that I wanted to work in the human rights field, and that I wanted to work in Cambodia, actually. So I went to Baker McKenzie knowing that it wasn't quite right. And once I qualified as a lawyer, I had the chance to go back to Cambodia and worked at the Cambodian Centre for Human Rights. I worked with the president, U Varak, an inspirational human rights activist, thinker in Cambodia, to rebuild that organization. And anyway, I'll sort of stop there.
What was it about Cambodia? Was it because the scale of the atrocity there was huge, and what was it about the connection that you felt? Because you've probably been to other countries during that period on your travels, but what connected you to Cambodia, do you think, looking back?
I think there are a few things. First of all, as you said, the scale, the enormity of what had happened under the Khmer Rouge, the civil war that followed. And I became very interested in that, and also moved by that, and felt a care for Cambodia as a country and the people. I felt a sort of inexplicable emotional connection to the country, as though when I first went, as though I'd been there before, and that there was a familiarity, which I can't kind of really sort of say much more about, only that that's how I felt. And, I also saw that there was some really kind of important human rights work going on after the UN peacekeeping mission in the early 90s. The civil society had been developed. There were some important human rights groups working to try and shape a better future for the country. The Khmer Rouge Tribunal was sort of kicking off, trying those senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge and those accused of being most responsible for the crimes committed during that period. So I felt that strong connection. I felt a real care and a passion for the country. And I also saw that there was an opportunity to perhaps do something useful and helpful working for a human rights organization there, and also that I would find really, really interesting and exciting.
Because the country came a long way during that period that you've been involved, right? It's come a significant way.
Look, in some ways it has. I think the government that's been the government in one way or another since the fall of the Khmer Rouge, I think they deserve some credit for peace, stability, and for some of the development that's happened. I think if I'm advising a think tank in Cambodia that my good friend Rupert Abbott, who I mentioned earlier, established a few years ago, and if I see some of the young researchers who that think tank Future Forum's training, the staff at that think tank, the kind of human capacity over the last kind of 10, 15 years, sort of, dramatic increase in capacity. And there's a sense of a new rising middle class. And with that, the hope is that there will be kind of more demands for proper institutions, public services. So there are some positives, but there are also, I think, some deep negatives and regrets that Cambodia has not fulfilled its potential after a lot of support from Western democracies, and also, so much great work by Cambodians, including in the human rights groups I mentioned. There's still such a sense of inequality, corruption, but also space for freedom of expression, for dissent, has been closed down over the last few years. And indeed, the election, a national election, is due to take place in a couple of months from now. And the main opposition party has been kind of banned from taking part again. So some progress, but also, I think, a sense of missed opportunity. But there's hope, because the new generation in Cambodia, I think, will demand change. And I think that will be kind of irresistible. Yeah.
And you've been really committed to human rights work, and you've started a hub for human rights experts. You've worked for Amnesty International. You've held a number of roles. You're still involved in that work now, as we've discussed. What's quality human rights work look like? Because the one thing that jumps off the page for me is the kind of humanizing of people is a great antidote to abuse, to horrible things happening to them. But that humanizing of people, obviously, is a whole legal element to it as well. But yeah, what are the secrets of quality human rights work?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, look, there are different ways, right, of defending and advancing human rights. And, you mentioned the importance of, the law and the courts, research, advocacy. I think you're right in terms of public acceptance and support. Bringing the human story to, any situation is really important. I mean, that's how kind of Amnesty has been successful in its campaigning, bringing to life any given human rights situation and calls for positive change with human stories. And, if I think back at the work we did at Amnesty in Southeast Asia when I was there, campaigns for the release of prisoners of conscience, land rights, protesters like Yorn Bapa, or journalists like Mam Sanando, bloggers in Vietnam, bringing to life those issues with human stories, is an effective way, I think, to engage the public, to fundraise as well, and to successfully campaign.
Yeah. It creates that empathy, right? So you said before about being empathetic and caring about people. And in terms of looking at your career, so it's kind of non-linear, but actually quite well thought through as well. Like, you're quite deliberate or intentional with what you've done. For anyone who wants to get into human rights or wants to follow, Rupert Abbott, what would be your advice?
Well, let's focus on wanting to work in human rights. So, look, I think there are a couple of things I'd recommend. The first thing is go for it, follow your passion. It's only if you do that you're going to feel that fulfillment, that you're making a difference. I knew that corporate law was not for me. And, it was sort of on paper a bit of a risk going to Cambodia to work for a sort of national human rights organization there. But it was life-changing. I never looked back. So follow your passion. I think the other thing I'd recommend would be that there are lots of ways you can make a difference. You can work in the human rights field. We probably would think of lawyers, activists when we're thinking about human rights work. But, there are also other important roles, whether it's with a small organization like GiveOut or a big one like Amnesty, whether it's in fundraising, in HR, in accounts, where you'll be making a contribution, and we're all pushing in the same direction. And the human rights movement needs good people, and you don't have to be kind of an activist or a lawyer to do that. And then I think the third thing I'd say, which is it's really important as well, as much passion as you might have, it's important to switch off and to have other interests, because actually it can be, it's so fulfilling to feel that in some small way, you might be making a difference. But at the same time, there are times where things are not going in the right direction. And times where in the course of your work day to day, you'll hear of, really, really shocking, appalling stories of how people are being treated. And it's important to be able to switch off whatever it is you like doing, hiking, drawing, art, music. It's important to be able to do that, for your own mental health.
Yeah. And what do you do?
Hiking. Hiking. I live in Brighton, just near the South Downs, and, try and go for long walks as often as I can. And also art. I like to do pen and, ink drawings when I can. Don't do as much as I'd like to, but, it's important to have something where you can just switch off and focus on something else.
Yeah, I think particularly important for people who, it's passion, or it's really connected to who they are. And it's, it's not like it's a job. It's about purpose and drive. And when it's really closely aligned with that, to that personal story, then I guess burnout could happen more easily, right? So you never switch off. You're always tweeting, writing emails, talking, taking people on, it's when it's really closely aligned to your own mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably also thinking about your own identity, right, more than you necessarily would if you weren't sort of working on something so close to your heart. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why that separation is important.
Yeah. I worked in a HIV hospice for a short time, and it was before combination therapies kicked in, and people was, losing their lives to AIDS. And, looking back, actually, it really affected my own focus on health and well-being. And for a period of time, unnecessarily, I think if I just processed it a little bit better. But you come across lots of, horrible stuff, or confronting issues, or, acts of atrocity or anger or whatever, that traumatized by the stuff you work with. How do you process it?
Oh, it's a really good question. I do try to compartmentalize it. So I do try to see all that stuff as kind of part of my job, and try to not engage with it too much, at weekends, for example. And it's important for me to also try and support my team, the teams I've built, managed over the years, to do the same. And if I look back at my career, there've been some sort of hairy moments, whether it's, certainly coming across kind of, really kind of difficult details and accounts, whether it was while working at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal or Amnesty, or indeed at GiveOut, but also some kind of hairy moments. I can think of covering protests in Cambodia with Amnesty, where, there was sort of live ammunition used, and, some quite traumatic times, actually. But as I say, I try and compartmentalize that, and I try and separate that. And I think there's probably something around kind of character. It's important to try and how to articulate this, but try and sort of have a certain resilience.
Yeah.
If you are sort of very, very deeply affected, if you know you're someone who would be very, very deeply affected by any of these accounts or experiences, then that probably is something you need to reflect on if you want to work in the human rights field.
Yeah. And as we work towards wrapping up, in terms of the future for GiveOut and what you see the next sort of 18 months, 2 years to look like for the organisation?
Yeah, well, look, as I say, we're celebrating our 5th anniversary this week. And if we look ahead, our aim is to unlock new sources of funding. We're looking at actually fundraising, growing, giving outside of the UK. We've got some exciting initiatives lined up in Europe. And I think I mentioned that, so in 5 years, we've channeled £1.75 million in new funding to LGBTQI groups annually. Over 5 years. We're looking to do that annually now. Yeah. So we want to provide what we've provided in 5 years every single year. And, and with that, we want to, see our movement winning decriminalization, winning marriage equality, creating more of these safe spaces, ensuring that LGBTQI people are included in humanitarian responses, across those areas of work I mentioned earlier. And, as we've discussed, sometimes it's not easy. There are setbacks, as we're seeing in Uganda and East Africa at the moment. But, there have also been, over the decades, some incredible successes. The LGBTQI movement's been very successful, and there's more to come. And what we say to our community, to our allies, is never give up, always give out.
Massive thank you for joining me on Purposely, Robert. Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Purposely Podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review. I hope you like what you're hearing, because I sure do.